I got the 2020 KTM 1290 Super Adventure R here. I'm doing the coolant. I'm going to do this with an airlift. So we got the fluid all drained, obviously the tank off, and unfortunately on this job half the bike has to come apart to get at the radiator. We got the radiator here with the adapter for the airlift tool. What this does is it's basically going to put a negative vacuum on the entire system. All the hoses are going to collapse, and then it's going to replace the entire evacuated system. It'll draw fluid, fresh fluid in to fill the displacement of the vacuum that it put on the system. So basically what that does is it allows you to fill the system with absolutely no air bubbles inside the system anyway. You can top off the overflow and be confident that you don't have to check it again. It's done. No hot spots, no air. So the airlift is all hooked up. And what I'm going to start with is, so this valve here takes the fluid from down there, the fresh fluid. This one is the open and closed vacuum, and this is the air that causes the vacuum or draws it in. So I'm going to draw up a vacuum with this, and we'll get started here. All right, so while we're holding vacuum at about 26, I'd say 27, I'm going to close the valve here, and then I'm going to cut the air off. And as you can see, it's not moving. If that needle starts moving down, you could wait about 10 minutes. If that needle moves down, that's indicating you have a leak somewhere in your cooling system. So I'm going to give it a few minutes, and then I'll open this other valve over here, and we'll bring in some of that nice new coolant, and I'll actually purge it. I'll bring the fluid up to here and stop the valve, and then I'll put a vacuum on it again. So I kind of, basically that's the way of bleeding this line, or I'm sorry, priming it, so we're not sucking that air that's in this tube. So we want to prime it all the way up to the valve. Okay, now I'm bringing the fluid up the hose. I'm going to try to do this without getting any fluid in it. I don't want it passing the valve, but it moves pretty darn quick. Okay, now you're going to see that pink fluid come up that line. There it goes. I'm just going real slow here till it gets to the valve. Now this is priming the system. Okay, so I'm happy with that. It got in there, and it's all the way to the point where there might be a tiny little bit of air about right in here, but that's not going to be anything to be concerned with because it's at the beginning where the stopper is. So you can see the vacuum went down a little bit, back down to about, I don't know, 20, 25, between 23, 24. So I want to bring that back up now that I have this primed, because I kind of wasted some of that vacuum on like this whole line that I talked about. So that's why that went down. So I'm going to put the air back to it and leave this closed because now I have that primed. Maybe 27. So that's real good. You'll never see 30 out of this. Plus, you wouldn't want to push it that far. You'll start breaking things. So we're right where we need to be. Now I'm going to go ahead and open this valve and pull the fluid in. And I've got my hose set up so it cannot come up out of that bottle and suck air, because if it sucks air, we have to start over and drain the entire system and start over. So I don't want that happening. And as the unit fills, the fluid will come in and displace, so you'll see the vacuum obviously go down, and there it goes. So right now this whole thing is filling with fluid. As that needle goes down proportionally, you'll see the jug going down. See it going down. Now that's just totally displacing where the vacuum was as that fluid leaves that bottle. And it assures you there's absolutely no air in this bike. And it's not going to go all the way quite to zero, so you'll know when it stops. And you also know that this bike takes 2.4 liters, and that's about what I had in there is 3, and I wanted an extra ½ liter left over to fill the overflow when I'm done. So this system really, with this valve open, it's pretty much filled. Okay, so now I have the KTM 1290 suspended from the beam. I'm going to put it on an angle like this and open the bleeders on both heads just to make sure there's no air bubbles in the system, and it confirms that my airlift does in fact put a correct vacuum on this. It's better to double check. Only took me about 5 minutes to rig this up. I can open these real quick. The bleeders are back in here. Probably not going to be able to see them, but they're up by those hoses, and I'll crack them loose. The bleeder sits basically right in there where that hose goes in, that bolt, that's that second bolt on the top. I'll crack that loose and it's a bleeder, and make sure that there's no air that purges out of that. That basically confirms that the vacuum system was working correctly, and then in the future I won't have to double check this. But this is a $30,000 motorcycle. Well, it's $22,000, but you know, there's an extra $8,000-9,000 in this bike, so, and it's almost brand new, so I'm not going to take a chance with it. I'm going to double check my work, and this is how the factory tells you to bleed that coolant, by the way. The wheel up from the center line 3 foot on the axle from the ground on that angle, and open the bleeders, because that's where they feel the air bubble will rise to the top. So I'll double check this and then start putting it back together. You can see the radiator is completely filled, but it is going down a little. The reason that's going down a little is because we have that bleeder open. You can see that it's dropping fluid. You can see it running down. So that tells me, I mean, I'm watching it run out of that bleeder. You really can't see it. You can see a little of the pink coolant. That tells me there's no air in that system whatsoever. That's pure fluid coming out with the bike on this exact angle that the factory's asking for. So it confirms the airlift was working perfect. So we're still up in the air on this side. I cracked this bleeder on this side loose, and obviously we see the fluid on the floor. It was solid fluid coming out of here on the exact wheel being up 3 foot with the axle from the floor. Again, I did not have to do this. I wanted to confirm it. This is a very expensive motorcycle and it's almost brand new. So I want to make sure this coolant got done and double checked. So in the future, this bike will never have to be lifted like this again. I've been doing bikes for a long time using an airlift, and I've never had a problem. So I just wanted to kind of make this video to show you both ways to do this. This is the factory way. But they don't use airlift, so the mechanics probably don't have them, or for what have you. But an airlift can take the place of all this extra checking and bleeding screws and all the rest of this. Well, if you notice here, another thing, the fluid's down a little. So the reason that fluid went down, you can see the pink right there in the top. It's equal to whatever's dripped out of the bleeder screws, but I have them both locked now, so I'm going to top this off, put the cap on it. I've already filled the reservoir, and then I'll put this bike back together. Unfortunately, when you do this KTM, you know, half the bike has to come apart. You got to pull the fuel tanks, all the side fairings, tank covers, spoilers, pretty much everything. So be a good time if you did this, if you have one of these bikes, to you know, do some cleaning in here or get some stuff out of your way. This one's really clean. And you could do the Rottweiler airbox mod while you're in here. You can also get rid of this right here. This is the secondary air injection system, or SAS. Rottweiler makes a block-off plate for this, so you can eliminate all of that EPA garbage. And you can get a few more horse out of the bike, and it'll run a little bit cooler. And you won't get any pop on deceleration, so it won't add any You get that pop when it adds oxygen and oxidizer to burn that extra fuel. So, but you know, that's for off-road use only is what they, you know, claim. So when you buy that kit, you can only ride off-road. Yeah, right. Like you're not going to go on the highway. Anyway, that's it. Peace out. You got a KTM 1290. And this is the 2020 KTM Super Adventure R 1290.